Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're embarking on an absolutely incredible journey. We're going to zoom way in on the psychology of your morning commute and then zoom all the way out to look at the massive complex machinery of the entire global economy. It's literally about connecting your brain to the globe. So let's dive right in. To start off, we really have to ask a deceptively simple question. Is a job just a paycheck? Modern economists often build their entire models on this assumption that we're these highly rational creatures who work primarily in response to financial incentives. Basically, you get paid, so you work, right? Well, if we actually look at human history and modern psychology, that purely financial lens, it misses a massive part of the human experience. It turns out the real story here is so much deeper.
Section 1. Why we actually work. The psychology of employment.
So researchers break this idea of meaningful work down into three core dimensions. First up is significance. That's the feeling that your work has intrinsic value, that it's just inherently worth doing. Second is broader purpose, meaning your work actually serves a pro-social goal way beyond just yourself. And third is self-realization. That's all about the autonomy and authenticity you feel while you're on the job. Honestly, chances are your own career goals crave these exact three elements to feel truly fulfilled, well beyond just cashing a paycheck. Now, if you doubt just how incredibly powerful that psychological need is, consider this staggering number, 70%. In a really fascinating recent study conducted in a refugee camp, researchers offered an employment program to folks who had been forcibly displaced. And the result? 70% of people willingly completed the work for absolutely zero pay, no money at all. They did it simply for the psychosocial benefits. And wow, those benefits were dramatic. Researchers measured a massive reduction in depression and stress, along with a huge increase in self-worth and cognitive performance. It really proves that the act of working itself is, at its core, a fundamental human need. And this reveals a super fascinating historical shift. Historically, if we look back to the Protestant work ethic, work was seen as this divine calling. It was viewed as a noble stewardship and a way to be a blessing to others. Fast forward to today, and modern economic theory kind of reduces work to this cold, rational calculation of financial incentives. The idea is you give up your leisure time purely because the wage compensates you for it. But as that refugee study just showed us, history might actually be a lot closer to our actual psychological reality than modern economics. Which brings us to Section 2, how we make decisions, individual choices. To really wrap our heads around our daily choices, we can turn to Gregory Mankiw's core principles of microeconomics. Basically, you face trade-offs constantly. To get one thing, you inevitably have to give up something else. So the true cost of anything is your opportunity cost, literally what you actually gave up to get it. You also think at the margin, meaning you make these incremental choices, like deciding to study or work for just one more hour. And ultimately, you respond to incentives. Your entire daily life is essentially a continuous, rolling calculation of these four rules. This crucial point is summed up absolutely perfectly by that classic economic quote, "There is no such thing as a free lunch." It perfectly hits the nail on the head regarding trade-offs. Think about it. Even taking the time to sit here and watch this explainer right now, it isn't free. The hidden cost is literally whatever else you could have been doing with these few minutes. You could be working, catching up on sleep, or hanging out with a friend. Every single action you take has an opportunity cost. All right, Section 3, micro versus macro, the economic lenses. To put it as simply as possible, microeconomics focuses on the small-scale, specific stuff. You, individual consumers, workers, individual firms, and specific markets. It really explains the how and why of personal choices and how resources are allocated. Macroeconomics, on the other hand, well, that examines the big picture. It looks at the overall environment those individual choices exist in. We're talking huge aggregates here, like total economic growth, national inflation, and nationwide unemployment. So if micro is like studying a single specific tree, macro is getting in a helicopter and surveying the entire forest. Moving right along to Section 4, measuring the entire economy, gross domestic product. And that builds perfectly into gross domestic product, or GDP. GDP is calculated through this pretty brilliant identity equation, C plus I plus G plus X minus M. What does that mean? Well, that's household consumption, business investment, government spending, and net exports. Add it all together, and it gives you the total market value of all final goods and services produced within a country. It basically serves as the ultimate yardstick for a nation's economic output. Now, when we actually apply this formula to the real world, it tells a wildly fascinating data story about different global economic machines. Take a look at the United States. An incredible 67.9% of its economy is driven by household consumption. It is a massively consumer-heavy engine. But then look over at China. Consumption there is only 37%, while investment is a massive 43.1%. China's economy is totally an investment-heavy machine, constantly building infrastructure and factories. And then you have Germany sitting somewhere right in the middle. The exact same mathematical equation applies to all three countries, but it reveals radically different economic strategies. Which brings us to our final stop, Section 5, 3 Schools of Thought, Steering the Economy. You know, economic thought has evolved so rapidly over the years, and it's usually been forced to adapt by massive global crises. Way back in 1776, right around the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, the classical school was born. But then, when the Great Depression absolutely shattered the global economy in the 1930s, that classical model just couldn't easily explain prolonged massive unemployment, and that failure gave birth to the Keynesian school. Later on, those nasty mid-20th century inflation crises forced yet another major evolution, which led to the rise of the monetarist school. So let's quickly summarize how these 3 distinct lenses approach solving economic problems. The classical school, pioneered by Adam Smith, really believes in the invisible hand. They think free markets are totally self-regulating and function best when the government just stays out of the way. But the Keynesian school argues the exact opposite, at least for times of crisis. They believe markets definitely can fail and that active government intervention and heavy spending are absolutely required to stabilize the ship. Finally, we have the monetarist school, which focuses almost entirely on the money supply itself. They argue that controlling exactly how much money is floating around in the system is the ultimate key to controlling inflation and keeping things stable. So 3 completely different ways to view the exact same forest. And that brings us to our final thought. We started all this by looking deep inside your brain, looking at that powerful psychological need for significance and purpose that drives you to work in the first place. Then, we zoomed all the way out to see how your individual daily choices aggregate into a massive, multi-trillion-dollar gross domestic product, managed by these competing global philosophies. So, here is the big question I want to leave you with today. We know why you work. But when you look at the complex world around you, which macroeconomic school of thought do you think creates the absolute best environment for your own self-realization? Really think about it. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. And remember, keep questioning the world around you.